This video is about your assignment 11, Modeling Volume and Ink Part 1. In this video, you will have your reference for your project. This is posted on your assignments page. So your project this week is to do the balls as represented here. And if you notice in your handout, the ball that will be on your left is showing you the kind of mark. In other words, that's a stipple mark. Here's a scribble mark. And then it's going over, and these are the ones I want you to do, where you're actually making something that may look three-dimensional. So we have stipple, scribble, this is wood grain, it's called wavy. Here we have contour where the lines are going over. We have cross contour and crisscross. And then we have these interrupted verticals that create kind of a hazy look. It's good for the background of your project. So where are we going with this project? The second part of this project is a still life. And there are many samples posted both on your assignment 11, project 11, and 12 of student examples, as you can see some here behind me. The wonderful thing about this project is, if I ask students at the end of the semester, what is their favorite project, they'll almost always say this one. And I think part of it is because it seems overwhelming at first, and then as you begin to explore and be creative and have success, it's very satisfying. I also had one student say they liked this project because they thought it was successful for all the students in the class, and so that made them feel good. So along with samples, you have you have the ball samples, and what I want you to do is take a piece of Bristol and trace around something round, about 2.25 inches across, so it's not so big that it's going to take you a huge amount of time. But I do want you to take time on this and get familiar with your pen. Depending on your pens, you will get different widths of lines. This is an extra fine pilot. This is a fine pilot. And these two are both larger, 0.7, I believe this one is. So I use a variety, but my favorite are the pilot, precise, extra fine. And these are roller balls. It's gel ink. It's not a ballpoint pen. So you can lightly draw your outline with pencil. You never want to outline when you're working with black and white medium like this. So you have to be extra careful that your projects will not have outlines. So your assignment is to do the 7 different line types. And then also, I want you to start thinking about backgrounds, because in my experience, backgrounds are where people start going wrong. This one isn't wrong, but it's the place where people sometimes hurry or don't think it out very well. For example, this is such a beautiful still life, but the background is just blah. It's just not enough going on there. And I think it really takes away from the beauty of that. So I would like you to start thinking, and when you submit the balls, I would like you all to submit about a 3 or 4 square inch set of ideas for backgrounds. So I would like to have 3 of those. I think the key is really not to hurry, to think it out ahead of time. But for right now, we're going to be talking about these. The other part of this assignment is that you block out, put your table lines. I don't know if you can even see them, it's so light. Make sure that you're using your square for any table lines or corner lines. One of the still life photographs has a corner of a wall, so there's a vertical there. Because you don't want to spend all that time and then have somebody be queasy because you didn't get it straight. Okay. In your part 2, let's see. You also have this, which is, you can use this templates if you want. Your drawings of your skulls are going to have to be bigger than this, so you'd have to enlarge it. These are just medical illustration drawings. I don't want you to spend hours and hours trying to get the skull right. And we can talk about that more during our next class. If you're thinking ahead, Stipple is really one of the best if you want to get something realistic. I think it's kind of fun if you go realistic with the skull, but it's certainly not necessary. And then go maybe crazy on the other parts. Even though it's black and white media and you have to make a commitment, people are reluctant to start. Just remember that you can always cut away parts that don't work and put a different background on, so don't worry about it too much. Don't do the darkest part first, because then you can't go back. Okay. So what I have here, I made some small samples, so I had a little bit more time. One is Stipple. So Stipple is your pen goes vertical to the paper. Now, depending on the thickness of your tip, you might have to be careful about how long you leave it touching the paper, because a bigger tip will leave more ink. So it's usually kind of a quick tapping. And then the idea of using black and white media and getting darker values is the concentration of the marks. So with Stipple, the greater the concentration of the marks, the darker the values will be. So keep that in mind. It's the same principles. The second one is Scribble. And that one, to me, this looks like a kitchen scrubby. And it really is a scribble. See if you can figure out how to make it lighter so the ball kind of has a highlight. And again, that would be having more density in the areas that have darker values. I call it the wood grain. It's called something else on your handout. This is a favorite one for students, and for me, my hand is kind of shaky. But students seem to start off with maybe this wavy one and then take off into some creative, wild, beautiful ideas. But I just want you to jump in and get your pen on the paper. And not be afraid. Here's contour. where we're putting lines across. So for example, if you're drawing something three-dimensional, your lines can go across. See how they bend over the surface? Or it can be abstract. But that's the purpose of this one. And if you look at Renaissance drawings, you'll see a lot of this because it can depict form so well, convex form. So you're just imagining the shape and you're making your mark over that three-dimensional shape in your mind. The next one is cross contour. And that has lines going in both directions. So they're still curved. And I make them at like a 45-degree angle and turn my paper. But you can do practice and play and see what you like. So I'm going to continue on here, and I'm making shorter contour lines. And then I'm going to come back across those at the other angle, almost making like diamond shapes. But you'll see this a lot in the Renaissance. Again, it's a very quick way of rendering form. And oftentimes you'll see this in sketches by Leonardo da Vinci or any of the other artists. Crisscross is one that is not as useful as some others as far as being able to depict form. However, I've seen it used really successfully both in backgrounds and in objects in the still life. And it really is just making crisscrosses, little short, straight lines. And again, to get darker values, you concentrate your strokes. It's a little harder to control. And in your final drawing, you only need to use 3 different line types. So you can avoid whichever ones you dislike, and you can create your own. Those 3 don't have to be from this assignment. Now, the hazy background one, I am going to use, let's see, can I show you this? If you're drawing straight lines with ink, and there's a chance your straight edge is going to drag your ink, so just tape a couple of pennies on the back to lift it up from the surface, to lift that straight edge up from the surface. If you choose to do a background that has lines, you must use a straight edge and you must use a square. But this works very well to kind of recede, and it's pretty random. It's kind of fun to do. So that's the first part of your assignment. The second part of your assignment is the background squares, and you need 3 of those. And then the final part of your assignment is to block in your still life. If you look here over my shoulder, you can see vertical compositions. I believe this one is, a couple of them are horizontal. Those last 2 are horizontal. There's the interrupted verticals. So what we want to do is make sure that when we're laying out the still life in pencil, that we get where we need to be before we start into the ink. So part of your assignment this week, the third part of your assignment, is to go ahead and sketch in pencil whether you choose a vertical format or horizontal format. And remember again that you're going to be using some 60-40 division. What I don't want to see is having the bottle right dead center in the composition, like a cross. Again, we would like that moved off center a little bit to a third or 40%. So you can play around and decide whether you want it horizontal or vertical. It's totally up to you. You have several, let's see if I have some other samples here. You have several opportunities of different angles on the still life. You can choose, or you can slightly wiggle stuff, but I don't want you to wiggle it too much, which brings me to something else, which is you have this attached to, I believe, the second part of your assignment. Measuring and comparing and measuring for accuracy. So when we have a skull and a bottle next to each other, as you're laying it out and you're overwhelmed, it's super simple just to take something flat and put it on top of the lower piece and run it to the taller piece and see where it hits. So now you know how high this is above the skull. Make sure you're looking at the negative spaces, because I've placed those in there so you have interesting shapes and a good balance of the objects. So we always want to be measuring and comparing. We could say, how wide is the bottle? And you can just do this by, I've got the real objects, but you can just do it on your images. How wide is the bottle compared to maybe the width of the skull, or the width of the angle of the skull, which actually is pretty wide because it's tipped at a 3/4. So it's at least twice, the skull's at least twice as wide as the bottle. And we know how high it is because at the highest part of the skull, we're running a flat. And the other thing I want to point out to you is sometimes I've received submissions where the student has changed the placement of the objects to an extreme, so that maybe the bottle's way over to one edge and there's a lot of space and the skull's over there. Remember that composition requires that the objects be in proximity or your brain doesn't see them as a unit, and it will view your drawing as chaos and reject it. So measuring and comparing and measuring for accuracy, it's all the same thing. This is probably one of the most important pieces of knowledge that you need to have if you're going into art, because even if you're drawing the human face, you're still looking at shapes. What is the distance between the edge of my eye and where my hairline starts? How high is this above my eyebrows? It's kind of rectangular. You see that? What shape is this? How long is it to the bottom of my cheekbone? And always remember, on a human face, the features are always symmetrically lined up. So you could put those cross marks across. Let's see, I have a sample. I don't know what I did with it. So go ahead and draw in I'll show you how to do it. Go ahead and draw in your center line. So if it's at 3/4, the center line's at 3/4. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Then the other thing in your still life photographs is you have two pairs. One is bumpy. See that? And one is very smooth and kind of fat, like a happy little, I don't know, organ grinder or something. And they're very different, aren't they? And I would like to see that because the quirkiness of an object makes it feel real to the viewer. We know that objects aren't maybe quite as perfect as this, but having them both and showing their differences is important. Then also their placement in the composition. I'm going from tall to middle with the skull and then to shorter down to the pairs. Okay. So I'm going to go down and begin sketching. My still life. I recommend at first that you only work on a horizontal line. If you want to put a diagonal table line in later, you can think about it later. And remember that you have to make sure that you have enough room on your table line to have the objects on the table. So let's see. I'm going to pull up the photograph of the still life so I can work from that. And again, please fill your space. Okay, so one of the things is we don't ever want to have the bottle right at the top of the composition. We need to give it a little space, so we need to think about that. The bottle also will be parallel to the sides of your composition, so that's kind of easy. I think I'm going to put the bottle about right here, and right now I'm just roughing in the placement of the objects. I'm going to keep moving it over. So these are the sides of the bottle, not including where the stem is going to be, where the bottleneck is going to be. I'm just putting the sides in so I can kind of get my placements. And I'm going to roughly put in, but not in ink or in where the bottom of the bottle might be. Once you get your sketch on here, you can erase any extra lines, and you can leave the pencil lines on during your ink drawing and erase them later. So there's the bottle. And now I'm looking at the pairs. The green pear comes up in front of the bottle here a little, and then up into the background little. So I'm just going to sketch that. What I think I really want you to develop in this sketch is the skull, because that's the part that students seem to struggle with the most. So look at, I just sketched it real quick. Now the other pear's coming towards us, and there's a purpose for that. It's moving into the composition to make it more interesting, and it's at a slight diagonal. It is coming up over. I can't see really the whole bottom of my bottle because the pears are in front of it. And I'm not committing to this. I'm using a pencil and I'm sketching light. You do not want to press hard on Bristol ever, remember, otherwise you can lose your ability to, because it'll make dents in the paper, and then you'll lose your ability to put ink where you want it later. So I've got my bottle blocked in and my two pears. And the important part is the skull. So Number one, how big is it compared to everything else? It's too bright. And again, you're welcome to photocopy your skull handout and go from there. This is too small for the composition. So in my still life, the skull is at 3/4 view. So I'm going to do the relative size, like where does it come in relationship to the pairs? What's this negative? What's the negative space here? Can't seem to get that lighting right. What's the negative space here between the bottle and the edge of the skull? What's the negative space between the skull? What's that look like right there? I don't have that. I don't have that right now. It's over too far. So always looking at the negative spaces. Remember, they help you decide where objects are, how big the objects are. You should always be checking on that. So now I usually, when I'm doing this skull, I have to redraw it a whole bunch of times. And I think that's normal. First of all, I want to see how big it is. So it's bigger and it's coming down further than the bottom of that pear stem. So that I know. I think it's higher here. The jaw's coming down, and again, I'm not committed to this because there's no way you can get it right the first time. There's too much going on there. But I am going to erase the table line because right now it's distracting me and it's making the skull look like a robot to me. Okay, so I'm not committing. I just put in a nose, but I'm not committing to it. You have to put stuff down to correct it and see what is right. Remember that even if a skull is turned 3/4, the eyes will be lined up, and we can compare. Where does the top of this nasal cavity come in relationship to the eye sockets? If I draw a line straight across from the top of that cavity, that seems to be the bottom of the eye sockets. And they're different shapes, so I'm just going to lay those in. So the fact that some of this is in direct light and some is in shadow does not change the fact that they're lined up or that they're the same shape and size, even if we're only seeing part or seeing them lit very differently. So now I can see this doesn't look quite right. The skull needs to come back further and forward further on the jaw. This is a complex object, and I'm going to be changing and correcting and changing and correcting. Right now I'm going to look at what the distance is between the bottom of that nasal cavity and I want to say the gums, but there are no gums on a skull. But remember that center tooth is going to be, again, and lined up on that 3/4 center line. So the nose, the eyes, the teeth, top and bottom. And then how long are the teeth? They're not all the same. They're not a big picket fence. Okay, I can see this looks really wrong over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and play with it. Remember that the cheekbones are also lined up. Even though this cheekbone under the eye socket on the away side looks so different from the one over on this side, they're lined up. Does that make sense? So don't be deceived by light and shadow and different things like that. So here the shadow forms a shape like that in the eye socket, but the eye socket actually comes over to here. So this doesn't look quite right to me right now. I'm gonna really have to look at how the bone, top and bottom of the jaw and the teeth. Also notice that the teeth don't go all the way back like a big weird cartoon. They only go to here and they're curving back. If you feel inside your mouth, your teeth start in the back and it's a tight, like a horseshoe shape. So they don't go flat across, and they will disappear as they go away from us. So how far are we going? And then what does that look like? The front part of the jaws, we come over here. So that's what I need from you this week. The ball drawings, the layout in pencil for your skull, drawing, because I get so many errors in pencil and I want to help you correct them before you go into ink, and then you'll have a week to do this ink still life. And your little sketches of the background. So I need 3 of those from you, lined up on a piece of Bristol. They can be 3 or 4 inches square piece. So be thinking ahead. You're welcome to change and add when you're drawing your balls if you're getting more ideas. And kind of think a little bit about what you like. I included some really nice student samples, and these will be due the night before your next class. And I will see you then. Bye.